Ove konverzacije će biti na engleskom, što nadam se neće biti problem nikome u prilici. I have a great honor to introduce our distinguished guest of honor for this year's Beokon, the writer Norman Spinrad, the man who's done it all, been everywhere, and later wrote about it, and his lifelong friend and companion, Donna Sadok. And tonight we will talk about
me.
About him and flashbacks from his life.
Tomorrow we will talk about other things.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
We'll talk about the Wild East, but rather do it. Well, as the Rolling Stones song says, allow me to introduce myself. But I'm not Satan, I think, although some people think I am. I have been writing whatever you want to call what I've been writing, sometimes called science fiction, sometimes called speculative fiction for 50 years. I've written 25 novels, maybe 100 short stories. I've been a critic of science fiction for 40 years. I've been president of the Science Fiction Writers of America. I've been president of World SF. I have been president of, no, that's not Donald Trump. You know, it's very hard to talk about yourself without sounding like you're bragging and stuff like that. But I started out reading science fiction when I was 11 years old, and I had a bad cold, and I was sick from school, so I was in bed for a week, and somebody gave my mother a big stack of science fiction magazines, and that's when I started reading science fiction. I never knew that there was such a thing as science fiction fandom or any of this culture until I had published one novel. So I did not come from that degree, you know, that beginning of writing science fiction. I read science fiction. I liked it. I felt that, in a kind of way, science fiction was artistically the right thing for me, because when you're writing science fiction, you're making up everything. You have total freedom to write about what you created. It wasn't about, for me, it wasn't about fans. It wasn't about, in a way, I was very naive. In another way, I grew up reading at the same time as EC comic books. I was reading Henry Miller and Norman Mailer and Jack Kerouac and stuff like that. So from the beginning of my writing this stuff, I was on both sides of that. That what other people thought was a divide between literary fiction and science fiction. And I really kept it at throughout my career. I've written many things that were, some things that were set in far futures. I've written historical novels. I've written thrillers. I've written political stuff. I've been a critic of science fiction for a very long time, because when I was offered the job, if offered is the word, is a little stronger than that, of being a science fiction critic for Asimov's magazine, I said, I'll do it, but I have to be able to relate what's being written in the future to the history of this literature, and I've been doing that for a very long time. I don't know what else to say about myself. It's very hard to talk about yourself without seeming like false modesty on one hand, or being an arrogant jerk on the other hand. I have been called a communist by Nazis, and I've been called a Nazi by communists. I've been published in about 15 languages. As a comedian once said, none of which have ever been identified. I don't know what, well, ask me a question or something. It's very hard to talk about yourself.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'd like to start from the beginning of your writing career. Can you explain us a little bit how it started?
Well, like many adolescents, graduating, going to college, my father wanted me to be a doctor because he didn't want to be a doctor. If I wasn't going to be a doctor, maybe I could be an engineer or possibly a dentist and stuff like that. So I pressure on me to go to college, getting a degree and a career in a safe economic job. So in my senior year, and I really didn't want to do that. I took some writing courses in college. Well, I took one writing course in college where it's a course in writing short stories. And the teacher, who had been a published short story writer, said to the class, I'm tired of getting the same stuff over and over again. Won't somebody do something different? I said, all right, you want something different? So I wrote a story about a couple where the man, for whatever reason, was collecting cans of chocolate syrup and putting them under the bathtub. And wouldn't tell his girlfriend what he was doing. And on the other hand, there became a an atomic attack, and everybody was going to die. At which point, he takes out the chocolate syrup and pours it all into the bathtub. And he says, well, to tell you the truth, I've always wanted to have sex with you in a bathtub full of chocolate syrup. And I figured that now we're all going to die, I can admit it. So they try and do it, and he finds it quite disgusting. And that's sort of the end of the story. But so the teacher says, in this class, you read the story in front of the class, and then you talk about it. And then you have a private meeting with the teacher. So he says to me, you can't really read this in class. However, it's really good. Why don't you try and sell it to Playboy, which pays a lot of money. And I said, and this is very key to how I taught later. I said, well, like an innocent person, student, well, how do I do that? And you expect me to get some kind of thing, well, you have to know somebody, you have to do this, you have to... He says, well, you type it out, you put it in an envelope, and you put another envelope with return postage in it and your address. If it's rejected, so you get it back. In those days, there were no computers. So if you didn't get it back, you had to type it all over again, which is really unpleasant. And he said, also, the best thing to do is send it to the magazine that pays the most money first. And then you work down, because then you know if you get an offer, you're not going to get a better offer. and then you just mail it. And that was the whole thing. And that's how I started. I didn't sell that story to Playboy. I sold it to another magazine years later after I published some other things. But it demystified the whole thing. I knew nothing. I knew no other writers, anything like that. Eventually, then, this was before I went to Mexico. Then, after I graduated from college, I got into 2 law schools. I went to Mexico for 2 months with some friends of mine, just with no money and stuff like that. So when I came back from Mexico, I really didn't want to go back to school. I mean, I wanted to write. And I had some friends who ran a sandal and leather shop, and they were selling stuff on the street in a thing that they do every year in New York. A lot of people's doing this. And I go to see them, and they say to me, look, can you watch this for a few, we got to go to the bathroom or whatever it is we're doing. Can you watch this for an hour or 2? I said, oh, okay. So I sold about $300 worth of stuff in an hour. I said, I come back, and they said, well, did you sell anything? They said, yeah, I sold a couple $100 worth of stuff. And I said, you did what? So I got a part-time job in a dirt cheap apartment and just started writing short stories. I didn't go to law school. I just started writing short stories. I had a cheap apartment. I had friends who were supportive of me, and I had a part-time job. I was paying my rent. So that's how I started writing.
How long it took you to sell the first story?
About a year. About a year, I guess.
It was a science fiction?
It was a science fiction story called The Last of the Romani. It was published in Analog magazine. Now, it took 6 months for John Campbell, who was the editor of the magazine, to read the thing and finally buy it, which was a little longer than normal because unlike other editors, he didn't have slush editors who were reading before him. He read everything, so it was slow. And that was my first publication. And that, if I got this right, that story was published in an issue of the magazine that had started to be serializing Dune. And somehow, literarily speaking, Dune, being published in the same magazine and doing stuff like that inspired me to keep continuing and believing that what I had to do was do the kind of thing that Frank Herbert did. And because of my non-fandom situation and because I read a lot of other stuff, that what I wanted to do was raise this kind of speculative fiction to a serious literary level. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
When people talk about you nowadays, they see you as an integral part of New Wave, with a lot of writers from the period. And when you just said that you wanted to elevate science fiction to some better writing quality levels and literary levels, that is something that a lot of people involved in New Wave try to do. So, but you also said that you didn't know them at the time.
Well, at that time I knew them. With Jack Barron, because again, I'd written The Men in the Jungle, which is a pretty rough thing. And then I got a contract to write Jack Barron, and I asked the editor at Doubleday, what are the taboos? In those days, there were plenty of them. And he said, no, nothing. Do whatever you want. Don't worry about taboos and anything. So I wrote I wrote something that was very political, with sex scenes in it all, in it. Ordinary heterosexual sex scenes, today would be, I don't know, something that you have in young adult books. Or maybe it would be too boring for young adult books. So they said, no, we're not going to publish this thing unless you take out all the sex and all the politics. So I said, well, that would make for just a short story, wouldn't it? So I spent a year trying to sell that book as a major book, and not being able to sell it. And then I went to the Milford Science Fiction reunion where I met Majkl Murkok, who at that time was starting New Worlds. Well, it wasn't starting, it was an old magazine, but he changed it. And that was a thing with, it's a workshop for writers. And I took, I don't know, first couple of chapters about Jack Barron, and Mike read them, and said, I want to serialize this book, which is what he did. So at that point, I knew Harlan Ellison, I knew Judy Merrill, people like that. At that point, I was part of what they called the New Wave. And the next year, I moved to London to be around that. And at that point, I was, I knew everybody. I knew everybody for another reason. Because when I needed a real job, I had an agent, Scott Meredith, who wasn't selling any stories, and I really needed a job. So I look at the paper, and newspaper says an advertisement for somebody, they want to hire an editor for $90 a week, which was good then. I guess maybe it's still good now. And they had a test, which was written in the same style. You have to read something and write something about it. It was in the same style of the rejections that I was getting from them. So I aced the test. And then I went and said, well, all right. And Scott said, I can't give you the job, you're a client. I said, the only reason I need a client is, I need this job, is because you haven't sold anything in 6 months. So I became, at a very young age, 27, a kind of literary agent. I knew much more than the people I was agenting anonymously, because that's what Scott Meredith did. Phil Dick, Arthur Clarke, Paul Anderson, a whole bunch. And then, so when I met Mike there, I knew all these people. I had met them before at a previous thing, but I never told anybody that I had been their agent until much later, if at all. So that's how I became an insider, I guess.
And you became quite notorious in England because of the serialization of Jack Barron, because I read that it even came to the Parliament. Complaints about that novel.
Yeah. Because the magazine was supported by the British Arts Council, part of the government, and they had a problem with a distributor who refused to distribute the magazine unless they stopped publishing the novel, which was in 6 parts. And then and the novel was announced in Parliament. I was denounced as a degenerate, and the Arts Council had championed the magazine and championed me, and there was, really right-wing Tories who were outraged at this sort of thing, and that's how that started.
Can I ask you, before moving to London and to Europe, you were from New York. You moved to LA and San Francisco.
Yeah.
How this did this move influence your writing and how it was?
I don't know.
Was it a different culture?
It was. I was living in the East Village, which is one kind of, you know, sort of beacon kind of thing. And I was on my way through the Milford Conference, which is in Pennsylvania, in a car with all my worldly goods in the trunk, after the Solarians had been published. And there I met Donna and Harlan Ellison. And I was going to go to San Francisco, so I changed my direction, went to LA first. And that's where I was chasing after Donna. And so was Theodore Sturgeon. No, neither of us were successful. But Ted, who later became, actually had already become my friend, and I was already his economic guru because I knew everything that he didn't about the business. So he did a very bad review of that of the Solarians in the National Review. But also, I met Gene Roddenberry was going around. I was writing for Cinema Magazine. I was becoming a movie critic, which, if you're not in LA, you're not likely to do that. So I have written some really good stuff, a really good inside. I was writing about 2001, but one of the things I said was that Gene Roddenberry's presentation sample for Star Trek is much better than 2001, which in my opinion it was. Otherwise I wouldn't have said it. So Gene called me up. You know, it seemed to be like a courtesy thing. You know, oh, well, thank you very much. Would you like to come in and pitch a story to Star Trek? And I was writing about Jack Barron at the time. And I said, in all naivete, call me back in 6 weeks. I'm writing an important novel right now. And 6 weeks later, he called me back. I don't know, you know, I was 27 years old at the time, you know. He called me back, and somehow we talked, I guess because I had written Cinema Magazine and because I was known as somebody who really knew the business, or something. I had never written a screenplay or anything like that. So he said, look, we're running out of money. Can you come up with something that can be shot on standing sets? Just the Enterprise sets. And I had something that I did have in my head. That was a novella that never sold. And that was a Doomsday Machine. Los Angeles was where I wrote by Jack Barron, where I wrote the Doomsday Machine, where I did all of that stuff. And I don't think I would have gone in the same direction if I had stayed in New York. It's a very different thing, but there were more opportunities. It was kind of more interesting, more sophisticated in a kind of. Well, it was my first experience of being in show business. Also, I was in show business as an important film critic for various reasons. I wrote The Doomsday Machine, and one way or another, I've been involved in different kinds of show business ever since. I've written songs. I just wrote another song for Bond Dessiné for comic. I recorded some songs with my old friend Richard Pinos. So I don't think any of that would have happened if I hadn't moved to LA.
Tell me, I'm making quite a jump here. Is there one of the reasons you liked Star Trek so much, the utopian society they describe?
Yeah. I mean, just the names of the two most long-lasting series. One was Star Trek, to go where nobody has gone before, to see new worlds, to, you know, spread good stuff. It was Gene and I had done, later on I did other stuff with Gene that never got anywhere, but yeah, that was like, and the other thing was Star Wars, which the title says the whole thing. Which I found, and still find, as cynical fascism. So, I forget what the question was, but that's the answer.
Okay. When we are at the fascism in 1972, you wrote to the Iron Dream. What was the behind that?
I was living in London, and Majkl Murkok's writing all these successfully. He was writing 11 books a year to support the magazine. He would just type and type and type, and write all these fast fantasy things. So I said, Mike, what's the secret for being so successful at that? And he said, well, you find some historical thing or some myth, and you put in a lot of Freudian imagery into it. And somebody came to me and said, oh, you mean like Nazi Germany? Like American space opera, like Wagnerian operas. And that was where it came from. I had never believed that, I never believed that what happened in Germany, that Nazi Germany, was primarily an economic thing. It was, but it was the manipulation of that sort of thing. Like, yeah, Hitler was a huge fan of Wagner's operas. And the big thing in science fiction was what? At the same time, space operas. So that's where it started.
So you transferred the Hitler into the science fiction writer and set in New York.
Yeah.
And you wrote his fantasy novel.
And he wrote a fantasy novel.
In the novel.
A novel within a novel within a novel. Hitler writes a novel about the Nazi Germany that never happened as a science fiction fantasy.
Some fascists like this novel within the novel.
The amazing thing about that novel, which has been published in, I don't know, 15 languages or something, including every country that was part of the Axis. Germany, Italy, Japan, whatever. And there was a lot of, it was banned in Germany. But even the people who banned it, and it was big, it was a law case that went for 8 years. It was on an index, you couldn't do certain things with it. But the people, the witnesses, the expert witnesses, their take on it was not that this is really a Nazi book. We understand that it's an anti-Nazi book, but people who are more stupid than we are won't. Which itself is kind of fascist. And the only bad review I ever got for that, and it was sort of a good review too, was from the American Nazi Party magazine, where they said, we really like this book, particularly the happy ending. But why did he have to screw it up at that thing afterwards, taking the piss out of it? That was the worst review I got, was from the Nazi Party. It says something that the book, in that way, was successful in doing what I meant it to do. It's not a pleasant book to read. It's a very, Hitler's book is very badly written.
Well, like his
He's a bad writer.
Yeah, where his other book.
He wasn't that good. He wasn't that good a painter either when you could. Well, my friend Roland Wagner, French writer, very good French writer, whose family were Pied Noirs, and he read that book when he was 14 years old, and he wrote an afterword to one of the many publications in French. That the book, when he was 14 years old, changed the way he thought about stuff like that. This is what I meant it to do. Well, that's
one of the most interesting series that it's only 2 books that have same let's say space that occupies. It's The White Captain's Tale and particularly The Child of Fortune. Can you tell us a little bit more about these books? Once you said that Child of Fortune is one of your favorites.
Well, it's the only time I ever wrote in the far, far future. 3,000 years or something. And in science fiction, usually when they're writing about a future like that, they have to say, oh, well, it's, there was some kind of apocalypse, the planet blew up, or there was a nuclear or something. But I never bought that. I wanted to write a book. I mean, after all, we know a hell of a lot about ancient Greece, about Rome, about many things like that from written records. Well, this modern culture has the books, has the CDs, has the tapes, has the movies. It's not going to be forgotten. So I wanted to write, well, it's complicated, but I wanted to write The Boy Captain's Tale, which was the first, in an advanced culture, which really was an advanced culture, that had not forgotten anything, that knew all the laws of mass and energy, that was enlightened in that way, and also the way they allowed their adolescents to mature. And then I wanted to write it, but they had never forgotten anything. And then I wanted to write it in what I call the lingo, which is a conglomeration of various languages, but everybody could speak their own Sprach of lingo, and different mixtures. For instance, The Boy Captain's Tale, which is a darker book, is more Germanic, and Child of Fortune is more Latino. And so that's why, I've never written a third book to make it a trilogy. People keep saying, do a third book. But I never had a story for a third book. And so I never did that. I might do it at some point if the story comes.
About the Russian Spring we will talk tomorrow more. I would like to ask you something about the greenhouse summer and the He Walk Among Us, which are more so-called ecological or novels which warn us about the future, which is very...
Well,
which game?
Well, Donna and I had worked on a thing which ended up a non-fiction thing called Psychosomes, which was about, well, what was it about? It was about the development of the science where it's understood how consciousness arises from matter. Is that good? And so I wanted to write, expand that into a non-fiction book about something, another thing called the transformation crisis, where since Hiroshima, we've been in a transformation crisis, where the human species can destroy the planet and itself in various ways, which we don't have to go into, or it can evolve into a stable civilization that can last millions of years. So I wrote a book about, I didn't write a book about this, I wrote an outline or something and sent it to my agent, not to my agent, to my editor, and L Rona Habarda, and he said, no, I don't want to do, I don't want to do this as a non-fiction book. I want you to do it as a novel. So I said, I'm not sure why I said it, but I said, I'll do it, but only if I can do it as a comic novel. And that's a serious comic novel, and that's He Walked Among Us, very complicated. And again, it's a comedian coming back from a destroyed future to change the future by changing the past. But in Greenhouse Summer, I wanted to show a post-climate future, which was ambiguous, which was realistic, based on the obvious idea, I think we were talking about this today at one point, that there are winners and losers. Florida and the Pacific Islands, and Miami, and Northern Africa are going to be losers. Siberia and Serbia are going to be winners because it'll get warmer, it'll get wetter, you know, agriculturally better, and so on and so forth. But I wanted, this was the future. We all know that communism has failed. Do we? Everybody know that? Except on a small level. But what we're seeing right now is that capitalism is also failing. So then the question is what comes afterwards. And what comes afterwards to me is syndicalist anarchism, which is what I used without even knowing I was doing it in Child of Fortune and Boy Captain's Tale. These are advanced cultures that don't have governments. They don't need them. You want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to take, I just wanted to take this back because I wasn't satisfied with the ending of the discussion or finalization of the discussion about Boy Captain's Tale and Child of Fortune. Those books have given Norman a credit which called him a feminist writer. In these books, he paid so much attention and so much sensitivity to the interrelationship between men and women and female sensitivity, that they're really dramatic and have a forward-looking perspective of the interrelationships between human beings and the way in which the world might progress.
Yeah, but you were there, Donna, when I was writing it, which is a world between,
yes,
which is directly about that.
Yes.
You know, openly and directly about that. It's about a culture war between kind of lesbian fascist women and male fascist.
It was from 1979, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
Before the White Captain's Tale.
Yes. And, but it was set in sort of, I wouldn't say utopian planet, but a planet that was democratic and where I, like Al Gore, I also invented the internet. It was an electronic democracy. But what I want, but in relation to what Don was talking about, I wanted to do something subtle. I wanted to show, do a society which was a kind of mirror image of contemporary society, where the women were dominant, but only at a subtle, to a subtle level, not to. And so that was the other element of it, and it was this society. It was a democratic society that had to keep its democracy while fighting only in the media, without any war, on any of the three sides, political campaigns. On the one hand, about the transcendental scientists, the male coming from elsewhere that were sort of semi-fascist, not fascist, and the political lesbians. The problem of maintaining a democracy from legal parties or forces that, if they win, are going to destroy your democracy. But if you fight them in an undemocratic manner, you'll destroy your democracy yourself. So I think that's when I was told by a feminist that I was the only feminist writer or something like that. It was earlier than Void Captain and stuff like that. It was more subtle. Well, I don't think that, well, Void Captain's Tale was also about sex and orgasm and stuff like that. Within, the point is you can, no, the point, it's an important point, because if you're writing a utopia, it's boring, you have to have some drama. But in Boy Captain's Tale, you have a personal drama and tension between two people who are living in the same good society, sort of utopia, but a utopia, political or economic utopia, doesn't wipe out personal, political, personal consciousness or sexual conflicts. In Child of Fortune, I don't know why I chose a girl instead of a man. I still don't know. There was no particular reason. There was no particular reason not to do it.
It's more optimistic than
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but the tale itself is much more optimistic, but it's in the same culture as Void Captain, where the story is dark.
Throughout your career, you had a problem with the publishers. And there are other writers who write about the sex and other things without so much problem. What is the main reason that you get such kind of pressures for different reasons, as far as I can see?
Well, I don't know. On one level, sometimes it's just bad luck.
Yeah.
And many publishers are crooks. And are unjust.
We know such.
Yeah. And I learned the business from Scott Meredith from the gutter up. So I was president of the Association of Writers in America. But there's another thing, I suppose, that Ernest Hemingway said, which that the writer is the enemy of the state, which may be kind of simple, but I think my problems, at least in terms of what the kind of stuff I'm writing, not the business thing, the dirty business of publishing, I don't think we're too interested in that right now. I'm having problems with Amazon and
You're not više for to.
I did, and they screwed the book. They did a very bad thing because my editor, just about bad luck, really bad luck. My editor, David Hartwell, had been my editor at several different publishers, the best editor that was ever in the field. And he was the guy, that was his book there. He fell down a staircase with his books and was killed before the book was published. It was an orphan book there. They didn't do anything. It was David's book, and the spirit, the literary interest of touring anything died with David Hartwell. Now, you know, luck, bad karma, God knows it was a lot worse karma for David than it was for me. That kind of thing. The other thing, you know, but the thing that Hemingway said makes a kind of sense. I don't know. Somehow, I've been on the barricades for 50 years. I think that my literary positives are have been commercial negatives. And you can see it much more strongly now. What the publishers want now in the States, and I think it's happening here too, is franchises. Franchises. It's easier now, at least in America, to sell a first trilogy than the first freestanding novel. I never did that stuff. I never wanted to do it, and I still don't want to do it. Partly for no other reason that it would bore me. I just would find it boring to keep doing the same thing all over again. People take a lot of work in creating their so-called universe, their franchise universe, so they want to get the dividends and keep riding it. Probably because I never wrote a third, second Starfinder book, was because I felt I had done it. If there was two, there was two. Three is just a number. But not when it comes to the bids.
So, no, I just wanted to say you were never one for the compromise when your writing was in question.
No, yeah, that's a fair statement. I'm compromising in terms of business and stuff like that. No, no, I guess I think that's a fair thing to say, and that's because I was lied to with Jack Barron by an editor who said, "No, don't worry about it," and I didn't, and I wrote the book, and after that, it was right into New World. And in a way, and stuff like Jack Barron or Brian Aldiss' Barefoot in the Head was much at the same time. You know, knock down the rules, knock down and Dangerous Visions. Various Phil Dick stuff, whatever. So I never felt, Hemingway again. At one point I went through a real Hemingway period. Hemingway also said, when I'm writing it, I'm an artiste. When I finish, I'm a son of a bitch. You know, you do the art, and then you try and get as much money for it as possible. But you don't, you make minor compromise, but you don't compromise before you set down to do, you know,
If you take a look at Norman's career, I don't think he's ever compromised his soul in what he's writing, despite what publishers have said. despite the authoritarian rulings that they tried to impose upon him, such as his book Osama the Gun, which was first published in France. In the United States, he was told an American publisher wouldn't touch that with a fork. They would not go with it, and they didn't. He's never been afraid to approach topics that have not gone with the mainstream. His focus has been on evolving consciousness, enhancing visions, and creating a better society, enlightening people. He's not a dystopian writer. And you see it in his books. If you watch the trajectory, none of his books are exactly alike. They're not in the same style. They're all different, but they all have a very strong heart towards humanity and toward the evolution of consciousness.
Well,
and you see that.
Two things here.
What?
One, well, like I say, I do not see any reason, with a couple of exceptions, to write a book or a story that leaves the reader more depressed and more unhappy than before they read it. I'll let somebody, if somebody else wants to do it, they can do it. I don't see any reason to do a thing like that. The other thing, you talk about Osama the Gun. We were right there, a mile from. Is this thing working? No. We were right there. Well, not right there, but we were like very close to 9/11. And I wrote some stuff for a thing about it for Libé, a French newspaper. And people kept saying to me, when are you going to write a novel about this? When are you going to write a novel about this? And I said, it's not the time. It's too early. The things that other people were writing were about how they felt, about what it was like to be there. That's, in my opinion, was not what I wanted to write. I wanted to write Osama the Gun from the point of view of a terrorist, an innocent terrorist, because it was a matter of sympathy to for the devil, that people should at least understand the consciousness that does this with a sympathetic character on a personal level, who's kind of naive and ends up doing worse and worse things. And it was really, seemed to me, it was a novel that really had to be written. And I said, it really had to be written, nobody's writing it. I guess I have to do it. And I knew damn well that it was going to be a very hard thing to publish. I usually get a contract for a book and then write it. I knew that I started out thinking I was writing a novelette. And then when I got to page 40, I realized I was doing a novel. And I knew that this was dangerous stuff, but I had to do it.
I fast forward that to the present with People's Police. We are also presenting a totally different type of book, but you're also presenting an alternate reality for the goodness and enhancement of mankind, and you're having difficulty with the publishing.
Well, they didn't publish it, they just trashed it because David was dead. That's money. This is a positive book about New Orleans and about how the police become the people's police. It was a very positive book. They did publish it, they just did a shit job because nobody cared about it over there and nobody read it because because David was dead. That was a bad piece of luck. And also, a stupid piece of business. But I can't say that anybody that any publisher would have not published that book because they felt it was too dangerous. I mean, unless they were, you know, severe right-wing Republicans or something like that, of which we have, unfortunately, too many. There's different things.
I was thinking to open the floor for questions from the audience, but I would just try to, if you don't mind, okay, but I would just try to ask you one more thing before that. You just said that you were on the barricades, and that it was obviously a fight worth fighting. But now, 50 years later, do you think that there is still that fight? Or maybe it's won, or maybe it's forgotten, or is it evolved in some other direction?
Well, it's different barricades in different directions, but I think that kind of thing is more necessary now than it ever was. I mean, I wrote a novella, which was a comic novel, about a president of the United States who starts out as a used car salesman in an Uncle Sam suit, is pumped full of drugs, and becomes a crazy president. And I wrote that before Donald Trump. You know, I think that sort of thing is always necessary. And the worse, as difficult. The worse it gets, the more necessary it is. That's why it's necessary. I don't know. Well, I'm working on another novel now, which would be very difficult to sell, called No Land, which is about the people behind, the people who are left behind by the current and future. Totally connected, internet, robotized society, and what happens when that whole thing crashes, which it will. And now I'm reading more and more stuff. I get Nature, because I write for Nature too, more and more stuff, scientific stuff about what this is really doing to culture, and what it's really doing to politics. I don't know. You know, this is stuff that has to be written, and not just on a political level, but after all, it makes good stories.
Can I now ask something from the audience?
Okay.
Question?
Hello. Norman Spinrad hasn't been translated very much in Serbia, so if there were one Norman Spinrad novel that ought to be published in Serbian, which one do you think it should be?
That's a difficult thing.
I have to say, I have my own opinion, but I've only read one, so it doesn't...
If I was just going to say one, and it's a big book, I'd say Russian Spring. Because that's about... It's become an alternate.
Yeah, we'll talk tomorrow about the
right.
Be sure to come.
Yeah, that's really for tomorrow. What would be then?
I'd say Child of Fortune.
Child of Fortune.
Because it's universal.
Well, it's also very difficult to translate. So it's about that thing.
So are entities, but people managed.
I would say. Probably Greenhouse Summer, because it's about a recognizable future. It's European world future. It's about a society. It's set in a society that is beyond communism and beyond capitalism, sort of, but it's not exactly utopia. It's a moral utopia in a crazy kind of way. And it's manageable. If that's a serious, Russian Spring, we can talk about that. I think for that reason, I think I would say Greenhouse Summer.
Thank you.
I propose this book for translation to Serbian, The Iron Dream, because it would click with the interests of these people who have experienced World War II on their territory. They, I think, would like this novel, which is, in my view, science fiction novel, first few pages, first 24 pages, and that last part with the amazement of what really happened, finally. And in between is fantasy, but the beginning and the end are pure, hard science fiction. Yes?
Well, now that you say it, you've got a point. There's only one problem in translating that. The book that Hitler writes, Lord of the Swastika, is really a lousy book. It's deliberately written in a bad way by crazy Hitler. So if somebody has to translate that book, they have to deliberately write bad Serbian.
That's not the problem.
I'm sure that people can do that, but
look, I did worse. And you just ruined my doctoral dissertation, because in it I claim that it's excellently written, very funny and very full of wit. This Ferik Yagar, the Iron Hunter, he is simply fun, and to watch his career, every few pages you really have to laugh. It's a funny and amazing fantasy, but the beginning and the turn around at the end, wow, that is science fiction, I should say, not fantasy.
well, you know, I got to admit, maybe this is egotistical or whatever it is. When you said that, I realized that this book hadn't been published in Serbian, but it's been published in so many languages and been out there for so long that I forget there are places where it hasn't been published. If somebody can do it, it certainly is germane to some of the things I'm learning about the history of Serbia and the history of Europe. Obviously, I'd like to see that polished. I don't know if anybody would want to try and translate something like that.
I can do it, don't worry.
But when you wrote it, you had to read Hitler's writings to try to emulate it. So if you struggled with it...
It was very unpleasant. I was sort of... it was very unpleasant. I was... what's the word? Well, I was trying to write as Hitler. I had to get into his head to write as Hitler. This is not a nice place to be. If it was, then the book is no good. I think there's never going to be anything written like this again. I don't think there's ever been written like this before. It's a book, it's a novel that has to be good in order to be, it has to be bad in order to be good. Because, the Hitler book is lousy.
You bring up a very important question, which is the translation, the art of translation is truly an art. It's an art in and of itself. A translator is a precious and vital thing to the communication of an author. For a translator to have the spirit, the heart, and the knowledge, the words, to be able to translate accurately is a beautiful, qualified craft. And I applaud those who do it well.
Well, yeah, Jared Klein, who published the French version of Jack Barron, it was translated by a man named Guy Barron, and it was a genius translation. Gerard wanted to publish Child of Fortune. Very difficult book to translate. But he said, I'm not going to publish this book unless we can get Guy Barron to do the translation. because you come right down to it, what the reader is going to read is the translation. They're not going to know whether the English book was good or bad. They're going to read the translation. And it's very important. It depends on the book. Some books are easier to translate than others, but when you're doing a complex style, or you're doing something crazy like, well, it is a story. You're writing a style of Adolf Hitler or something, or you're writing in lingo. It's really important to understand that, as Don is saying, that what the reader is going to read is the translation. There are certain instances where, where the translation in some languages is better than the original. Boris Vian in France, he was a very good writer in French, translated a lot of A.E. Van Vogt, who had some good ideas, but was not nearly as good a writer as Boris Vian. So the French translations are much better than what Van Vogt wrote. If you read the Rubaiyat of Amakanyan, what's the name of it? I forget. The Fitzgerald translation is the genius thing that people always read. It's not the accurate literary translation. It's much better. So it really is an art. And there are some things that are very hard to translate. That you need. I was fortunate. He walked among us, and Police State, and a couple of other books that were translated either by by Roland Wagner working with Sylvie Denis, or just written by Sylvie after he died in a tragic accident. That both of them, but particularly Roland, were good original novelists in their own language. And their own language, so if it's possible, it's better to have somebody who's a really good writer in their own language doing the translation, that they can do their own stuff originally that's good, than somebody who's just accurate.
When Sylvie was translating He Walked Among Us, she called one day and asked for a definition of blue meanies. Blue meanies. Try to figure that one out and translate it. And another thing with that book, as no one channeled Hitler, but that book, He Walked Among Us, the comedian Ralph, the God comedian, whomever he might be, had to tell a lot of bad jokes, which Norman had to write.
300 jokes.
That's difficult.
What's really difficult is not just writing 300 jokes, which is difficult enough, but some of them have to be deliberately bad, but not too bad. To deliberately write 100 or so mediocre jokes.
I just wanted to say that you made about half of the crowd very proud of themselves right now.
Hi, you mentioned that in one of your universes, one of your books, the society depicted in the book was basically anarcho-syndicalist, right? On what prior or current anarcho-syndicalist society, and let's not forget that it was a prosperous and advanced anarcho-syndicalist society. So basically, in other words, on what prior or current advanced and prosperous anarcho-syndicalist society did you base that civilization? And on what principles do you think such a civilization could ever exist, even in theory?
He created it.
Based on what exactly?
Based on, I would say, based on his perceptions and his assessments. I don't think that he modeled it after any known given society. government that's worked successfully, because none of them seem to have.
I agree, so basically wishful thinking.
I don't understand the question that way.
He asked, on what basis people develop cynical. How you develop, where you start.
I didn't, you know, it started really with Child of Fortune and Boycott and Steele. Not until I had finished those books did I realize that this advanced society didn't have any governments, didn't need it. So that was the beginning of my idea of anarchy. But chaotic anarchy is one thing, and it doesn't work. Syndicalist anarchy is kind of conservative anarchy, or something like that, where there is a cultural matrix in which the economy can take place and can work. The closest thing that you see to this, and it's not that close, and it's very small, is the Israeli idea of kibbutz. That's a kind of syndicalist anarchy on a small scale. On a large scale,
Is it much different from anarcho-capitalism, or is it polar opposite?
Is it, I didn't understand.
Is it similar in any way to anarcho-capitalism, or is it polar opposite to it?
It depends on what you mean by capitalism. I've lately become a capitalist myself. I'm making a lot of money on the market because I know how to do it. It's not capitalism per se. Well, to make the difference, it's the difference between market economy and capitalist economy. I think if you don't have a market economy, nothing is going to work. Capitalist economy is where capital is stronger, where capital goes up to the 1% and rules everything. But you have to have some kind of market economy. Without a market, I can't think of a society where it worked without a market economy, or even if it tried. That's why really, theoretical communism really doesn't work.
Agreed.
But ultimately, again, another book that wasn't published here. It's a small book. It's called Raising Hell. We guys, all right, okay, we got it. I missed it. Wait a minute.
Talking about free market.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. You can't have an economy that doesn't work without people trading things for other things and making some money doing it, or making something from doing it. Pure anarchy. What is that? It's chaos. It's bad chaos where nothing works. But a more rigorous definition of anarchy is syndicalist anarchy, where the people who do the work own the company. But there is a company, and it is doing work, and it is making something, and people are buying it.
We tried in the former Yugoslavia such kind, it didn't work.
But we can talk also about that later, because we're really talking about travels to wild communist east.
Can I go back to this is as far as I know, these are the only book of essays that you have. Why it's fantastic book by my opinion. The essays which are truly.
Well, because
why you don't have in English such kind of?
I do.
Yes, but this.
This is a collection of things that about my criticism in Asimov.
Yes.
And I collected. There was a book published of earlier ones called Science Fiction in the Real World.
Science fiction in the real, but this is the
Yeah.
that
No, I don't know. David Hartwell, David Hartwell is talking about publishing something like that.
This was from
No,
2011.
This is a collection
Yes.
of maybe of some of the later things.
Here there are
I don't remember why hasn't anything like that been published yet. I don't know. I haven't thought about doing. Also, putting it all together.
Did you try to sell that or?
Well, putting it all. I put some of it on. I made a little ebook of some of it, but this is what 40 years of criticism, and to find the text of everything. And to put the book up. If somebody else wants to do it, all well and good. But it's a big job. The first book I did myself, and it was a book about science fiction that itself was coherent. Putting all this stuff, you want to do it, go ahead and do it.
This was one.
It's a really difficult job. A better question is, maybe I will get an answer before I leave here. Is how come it's the only book that's been published in Serbian?
Where is Boban?
Okay, we will talk about it in private. Okay, is there? We have maybe time for one more question. So
One.
just one.
Well, my question was, you mentioned some magazines and publishers. My question was regarding the heavy metal magazine, and what is your opinion about it? Its influence on science fiction.
About magazines? Heavy metal is long gone. No. The magazines are in trouble. At least the printed ones. Asimov's and Analog and Fantasy and Science Fiction used to publish a print like 100,000 each month. Now it's below 30,000. The magazines are really in trouble for a variety of reasons, I suppose. There's a lot of online magazines that aren't the same thing. Murkok and I are forever trying to figure out how we can revive, do some kind of version of New Worlds, but we haven't gotten anywhere at this stage of the game. Mike still owns it. Still owns it.
Reanimated. Okay, thank you all for coming, and thank you. Biće i sutra razgovor sa gospodinom Spinradom o njegovim putešestvijama po istočnoj Evropi i očigledno o knjizi Rusko poleće. Takođe, ako neko želi potpis, neće biti organizovana posebno potpisivanje, znači ako želite da vam potpiše, ima tu na štandu čudne knjižare i Mito, i Okvir, i perspektiva, izvinjavam se, tako da ga možete nahvatiti sad u polazu dok je ovdje i bit će sutra će se motati pre i posle tribine po komerciji. Ok, hvala vam puno, vidimo se sutra.